So in the first part of our lectures, what we have seen is how exactly the populations interact with each other. What are the different ways in which they interact? What is their natural environment? What is their habitat? What is their role in that habitat? All these kind of things, that is something that we have discussed. We discussed at length various kinds of organisms and how they have adapted to the environment over a period of time. So all these kind of things are done. Now in this part, we'll try to understand how exactly the flow of energy and flow of matter happens in this ecosystem. Because once you know how exactly the flow of energy and matter happens in an ecosystem, then only will you be able to understand how this ecosystem is able to survive. Because survival will not happen if the flow of energy or flow of matter is not happening. So this is what we'll discuss. So mainly there are two things. One is flow of energy and the second is flow of matter. So what is flow of energy? In flow of energy, we'll discuss two things. What is food chain and what is food web. So once we come to it, I'll discuss in detail what exactly these two terms mean. And to discuss flow of matter, we'll discuss various kinds of nutrient cycles. And here we'll discuss what is water cycle, what is carbon cycle, what is nitrogen cycle, and apart from that, in small details, in brief details about phosphorus and sulfur as well. So this is what we'll discuss. Now to start with, first of all, you need to know that ecologists assign every kind of organism a kind of feeding level, or something which is also called as trophic level. There's a trophic level which is assigned to each and every organism depending on the source of its food or the source of nutrient. So the living organisms that transfer energy and nutrients from one trophic level to another in an ecosystem can broadly be classified either as producers or as consumers. We'll have a detailed discussion on this as well. Producers many a times are also called as autotrophs. They are called as autotrophs, meaning that they are self-feeders. So they do not depend on any other organism for their food, and that's why they are called as autotrophs. And consumers most of the times are called as heterotrophs. Why? Because they depend on others for their food. So most of the producers are autotrophs, and on land most producers are green plants, and they follow a process called as photosynthesis, which I'm very sure that all of you are aware of. You must have heard of this term, photosynthesis, in which the plants make their own food in the presence of sunlight and water. So the plants during photosynthesis capture approximately 1% of the entire solar energy that falls on their leaves and use it to combine carbon dioxide and water to form organic molecules. And this organic matter can be in the form of something like carbohydrate. Carbohydrate is required as a nutrient. Why? Because it provides energy. So there are hundreds of chemical changes that take place during photosynthesis, but overall, if I have to summarize that how exactly the flow is happening, how photosynthesis happens, so basically carbon dioxide in the presence of sunlight and water will produce glucose and oxygen. So carbon dioxide in the presence of sunlight and water will produce glucose and oxygen. So this is what will happen in photosynthesis. So I have not written a balanced equation here. If you want to balance it out, you can just add 6, 6 and 6 here. This will balance out the equation. So carbon dioxide in presence of water and sunlight forms glucose and gives out oxygen. So this is what happens in photosynthesis. So if we talk about, let's say, fresh water and like marine ecosystems, the algae and the aquatic plants that grow near the shorelines, they are the major producers. And in the open waters, the dominant producers mainly are phytoplanktons. They are phytoplanktons. And all the other organisms in the ecosystem are basically consumers or heterotrophs. So these, as we discussed, they cannot produce their own food. They need some other resource for their source of energy. and that's why they are highly dependent on the autotrophs for their energy or nutrient requirements. Now, there are various kinds of consumers. We have only talked about the fact that you have a producer and you have a consumer. But even the consumers are of various types. So, for example, you have herbivores, you have carnivores, and you have omnivores. So, these also are kinds of consumers. Now, depending on what is their nutrient, what is their chief nutrient, whom they depend upon for their food, depending on that only we classify them according to this. Now, so talking about herbivores, herbivores are the ones which feed on plants, which feed on autotrophs. So you can say they feed on autotrophs or green plants. So you can take, as an example, you can take deer, you can take rabbit, all these are herbivores. So after that you have carnivores. Now carnivores are the animals that feed on the flesh of other animals. So these are the ones which feed on other animals. Prime example can be a carnivore like lion or tiger, etc. Then you have omnivores. Who are omnivores? Omnivores are the ones which eat plants as well, or they can feed on autotrophs as well, and they can feed on other animals also. So these kind of organisms would be called as omnivores. So they can feed on plants and animals. Among the animals, if we have to talk about, we can take bear as an example, which can feed on plants also, which can feed on animals also. So these are different kinds of consumers. Now apart from that, you have higher consumers as well. For example, the consumers that can feed on carnivores, these would be called as higher consumers, and we'll come to that discussion as well in some time. So omnivores that can feed on plants and animals, for example, you can take bear, you can take fox, you can take humans, the non-vegetarian humans as well. So apart from that, you have another very important part of this ecosystem. These are decomposers. What is the role of decomposers? Who are decomposers? Decomposers are the one which would feed on dead plants and animals and return them to the soil or water or air for reuse by producers. This is the role of decomposers, and they have a very, very important role in the entire ecosystem. Now, most of the decomposers are either bacteria or fungi. Apart from that, you also have some other decomposers as well, which are called as detritus feeders or detrivores. They are called as detrivores. What are detrivores? They feed on the waste or the dead bodies of other organisms, and that's why they are called as detritus. What is the meaning of detritus? Its meaning basically is, it is derived from detritus, meaning debris. So that's why they are called as detrivores. So these examples you can take as earthworms or vultures, insects. All these are also examples. So you can take earthworms, vultures, etc. as a part of this, and other decomposers are bacteria and fungi mainly. So I hope this part of discussion is clear. Many of you might have been very familiar with all these concepts already, but still, just for your brief understanding of all the things that we are going to discuss, this is a very important discussion. Now, the detrivores and decomposers are also very, very important from the point of view of nutrient cycling or the flow of matter. For that, it's very, very important that we have the decomposers, otherwise the cycle would not complete. Without them, you can very simply say that the planet would be full of animal waste, dead bodies, garbage, all these kind of things. Primary producers and decomposers, they use the chemical energy that is stored in the glucose and the other organic compounds so that they can run their life, they can fuel their life processes. In most cells, this energy is released as aerobic respiration. What is aerobic respiration? A kind of respiration that needs oxygen, and this oxygen is used to convert glucose into carbon dioxide and water. So oxygen is used to convert glucose into carbon dioxide and water. This is what happens in aerobic respiration in humans, in other animals, etc. So that's why this is very, very important, that all the oxygen that we get from these kind of processes, this is used by animals. So that's why there is a cycle which is running. So the net effect of the hundreds of steps of this complex process is the fact that glucose and oxygen is being converted into carbon dioxide and water and releases a lot of energy. It releases a lot of energy which is used for your day-to-day activities. So that's why this entire process, running process, is very, very important. Now let's come to the first kind of flow of energy, that is food chain. So what is food chain? Now you know that every plant and animal, irrespective of the fact how big they are or how small they are, they depend on one or the other organism for their survival. It could be, let's say, to take pollens from a flower, as we discussed. It could be for photosynthesis of the plants. Deer eating a plant or animal eating a deer. So each and every part, if you see, is dependent on another species. So now this food chain basically shows how energy is transferred from one living organism to another via food. So it, in simple words, is depicted by who eats whom. It is the relationship of who eats whom, and that's why we are talking about the fact that energy is being transferred from one living organism to another via food. So that's why it is very important for us to understand how food chain works, so that we can know what are the important living organisms that make up the food chain and how exactly this entire ecosystem is balanced. So photosynthesis, if you say so, is just the beginning of the food chain, and there are many types of animals which will eat the products of the photosynthesis. After that, these animals will be eaten by another kind of consumers, and that's how this food chain will continue. And once these consumers die, then there are detrivores, there are decomposers, which will decompose their body and release some energy, and this energy will be used by plants again. So this kind of cycle will continue. So if I talk about a food chain, so what we can say is that food chain describes how energy and nutrients move through an ecosystem. At the basic level, there are plants that produce the energy, then it moves up to a higher level organism like herbivores. After that, when the carnivores eat the herbivores, energy is transferred from the herbivores to the carnivores. So in the food chain, energy is transferred from one living organism to another in the form of food. There are primary producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and decomposers, all a part of the food chain. Even we also have another category called as tertiary consumers sometimes. So this is what we see. Now if you look at this particular picture, you will understand what exactly happens. So we have sunlight, and sunlight is being used as a source of energy, and this energy, first definitely there is some loss in form of heat. Now this solar energy is being used by plants for photosynthesis. From there, energy is being released, and this energy is being used by primary consumers by when they eat the leaves or they eat the flowers or anything of this plant. Now these are basically called as primary consumers, or in other words, herbivores. So this is the first trophic level, this is the second trophic level. Then we come to the third trophic level, which is a secondary consumer. What is a secondary consumer? A consumer which will eat the primary consumer. So in this case, carnivores. And there after that you can have another trophic level, which is the fourth trophic level, and here you have tertiary consumers, or the top carnivores, the carnivores which would eat other carnivores. These could be termed as tertiary carnivores. And at every point you see there is a loss which is happening in form of heat. Basically what happens is we follow a 10% law. What is 10% law? If you had, let's say, 10,000 joules of energy from the sun, the transfer that will happen from this to this would be only 1000 joules. From here to here, you just get 100 joules. From this, again a 10% law is being followed and you just get 10 joules. And finally, for this particular organism, you just get 1 joule. This is how the transfer of energy happens. So the energy that you would get from a primary consumer, or let's say you would get from a producer, would be much higher than the energy that you would get from the consumption of a secondary consumer. So this is what happens in a food chain. Now this, if you see as another example, this is what happens among insects in the food chain. So again, primary consumer being the plant. From the plants you have nematodes, which are the primary consumers here. From there you go to the next one, which is arthropod, and then from there to either to animals or to birds. So this is another example of a food chain. And similarly, from the organic matter, the organic matter may get consumed by the bacteria. From bacteria, these bacteria can get consumed by nematodes, and then from there the higher nematodes, and from there is a possibility that they will get consumed by arthropods, and this cycle may continue like this. So either you have this cycle, or you have this cycle, or you may follow this cycle, or you may follow this cycle, but all these are examples of food chain. Then another example if I have to give, and this is underwater, that again solar energy is being used. From solar energy you have primary producers, which are phytoplanktons or seaweeds. From there you come to the first consumer or primary consumer, which is a zooplankton. From here you get the first level carnivorous consumers or secondary consumers. These are basically small fish, etc. Then from there you move on to larger fish which consume these fish, and from there you get to even larger consumer, which is something like a squid, which can feed on even bigger fish. And from there you may go to the top carnivore, which can be a shark, which can be a dolphin, which can be an albatross. All these are higher level consumers. So as we move in this trophic level, what happens is the amount of energy that they get from here, that starts to get reduced from each and every organism. This is what happens. Now, what is the importance of food chain then? First of all, through the food chain, the transfer of material and nutrients take place. A food chain shows how the organisms are related to each other by the means of the food that they eat. A food chain describes the method in which a particular organism collects its food. It is an arrangement of who eats whom, as we discussed, in a biological community or an ecosystem to obtain the. Then one question arises here. We talked about the 10% rule, right? And the fact that the amount of energy that you get from plants will be much higher than the amount of energy that you get from carnivores, or the amount of energy that you get from herbivores or animals, because they have lesser amount of energy that they retained from the previous plant. So does that mean that if I am a vegetarian, I should have more energy than the ones who are non-vegetarians? Is that a fact? To answer this question, just try to understand this. We are talking about trophic levels, right? And the fact that at each trophic level, roughly only 10% of energy is getting transferred. The rest of the energy is getting lost. Now, if let's say somebody who consumes plants against somebody who consumes animals, here, if let's say you get some amount of energy by eating 1 gram of a plant, you would actually need from an animal approximately 10 grams, so that you are getting the same amount of energy that you got from the plants. So that's why if you are at a lower trophic level, that instead of being at the 3rd trophic level, if you are at the 2nd trophic level, in that case you get more energy from less mass. And if that's not the case, then you get lesser energy from more mass. And that's why instead of consuming 1 gram of a plant, now you need 10 gram of the same, or you need 10 times the mass of the plant that was consumed by that particular animal, so that you can compensate and get the same amount of energy that you wanted. So that's why this is a very tricky question to answer. Now, next that we have is food web. And what exactly is food web? So food web represents the feeding relationship within a community. Normally, food webs consist of a number of food chains meshed together. So why are we talking about food webs now? Normally what happens is that food web consists of a number of food chains meshed together. So just think of the idea of a food chain, that we talked about the fact that there is a chain that from one plant to one animal to one animal to second animal, and from the second animal to the third animal. So all this is happening in a very linear fashion. But this doesn't happen in real life. Something like this happens that we discussed, that there can be a number of food chains that can exist, and this number of food chains would be called as a food web. So if you look at this particular picture, this is from the food web under water. So what do you see here? You see that one phytoplankton can be consumed by two different kinds of organisms. It can be a herbivorous zooplankton or it can be a krill. Now this krill can be consumed by a carnivore plankton, or it can be consumed by a fish, it can be consumed by a petrel, it can be consumed by a penguin, it can be consumed by a seal, it can be consumed by a blue whale. So there is no one single line. There are multiple lines from a single organism. So that being the case, this cannot be represented. The whole network cannot be just be seen as a chain, but instead of being seen as a chain, it has to be seen as a web. So that's why we use the term food web more than we do for food chain. So food chain is a very simpler form of a food web, where you just get one single line and you don't actually count all the things or all the kinds of organisms which are actually present there. So food web offers an important tool for investigating the ecological interaction that define the energy flow between the predator and the prey. So this is why food chain or food web is more important than food web. Then, so if you take another example, this is what happens on land, that from green plants you have rabbits, deer, caterpillar, grasshopper, etc., which can be seen as primary consumers. From there, the rabbit may be eaten by a fox or by a snake, a deer may be eaten by a lion, fox may be eaten by a lion, snake may be eaten by a hawk. So if you see, this again is something which is much more complex than a very single food chain, and that's why we use food webs. So food webs can be used to illustrate the indirect interaction among species. This is a very, very important point. You can note it down, that food webs are used to illustrate indirect interactions among organisms. So what is another important point? Something that we just discussed 2 minutes back, that they can be used as an important tool for investigating the interactions that define energy flow and predator-prey relationship. Now, one more thing that is suggested by a food web is that the number of consumer, or let's say number of secondary consumer, is dependent on the number of primary consumers, and number of primary consumers of different variants. I'm not talking about a single population. I'm talking about different populations of primary and secondary consumers, and how exactly they are interdependent on one another. So it suggests that abundance of population at any given trophic level is controlled by the productivity and abundance of populations in the trophic levels which is below them. So you can just make a note of this point as well, that food web suggests that productivity and abundance of a trophic level are controlled by the productivity and abundance of populations in the trophic level below them. Another important point is that food web can be used to reveal the different patterns of energy transfer in terrestrial as well as aquatic ecosystem. That can be used to reveal different patterns of energy transfer in terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. So why we are talking about patterns? Because the pattern in which the energy flows or the food is supplied from one trophic level to another is very different in different kinds of ecosystems. It is different in various kinds of terrestrial ecosystems, various kinds of aquatic ecosystems, because aquatic ecosystem of a pond is different from the aquatic ecosystem of a sea. So that's why you cannot say that all the aquatic ecosystems are similar or all the terrestrial ecosystems are similar. So all these relationships that we have, it can be seen very well in a food web. So next, something that we have already discussed, trophic level. So now trophic level is basically levels of a food chain. Trophic level of an organism is the level that it holds in a given food chain, or you can say a food pyramid. We'll come to what is pyramid. So sun is the source of all the energy in the food chain. Green plants absorb some of the sun's light energy to make their own food by photosynthesis, and that's why the green plants or autotrophs are therefore known as producers in the food chain. So something that we already discussed. Then the second level of food chain is called as primary consumer. These consume the green plants. Animals in this group are generally called as herbivores. Then the third chain are the secondary consumers, and these usually eat up the primary consumers and other animal matter. So all these things we have already discussed. Secondary consumers, what are the animals which are called as secondary consumers, what animals are called as primary consumers, all these things we discussed. So just have a look at this so that you understand it better. Producers, the main source of energy is solar energy. Examples can be green plants, etc. Then herbivores are actually producers. Then you have grasshoppers, etc., which can be example. Then you have primary carnivore, you have secondary carnivore, you have omnivores, and you have detrivores or decomposers. So all these we have already discussed in detail. The next topic that we need to discuss is ecological pyramids. What are ecological pyramids? First of all, each ecosystem is characterized by the interaction of food chain, the metabolism relationship between the linearly arranged biotic components of an ecosystem. And this characteristic is called as trophic structure, something that we just discussed. Now, the trophic structure and function at successive trophic levels, that is from producers to herbivores to carnivores, that can be shown graphically by the means of an ecological pyramid, where the first or the producer level constitutes the base of the pyramid and the successive level that the tiers are making the apex. So first of all, what is a pyramid? Pyramid basically is any shape that has an apex and has a base. So you can say that this basically is a kind of a pyramid where there is a apex and you have a base at the bottom. So normally whenever we make a pyramid, we normally see it as having a triangular base and then an apex at the top. So ecological pyramids basically show us the trophical structure and function at each successive trophical level. So first of all, let's see what kinds of pyramids do we have and why do we need these pyramids. So first of all, we have a pyramid of number, you have pyramid of biomass, and you have pyramid of energy. So pyramid of number will show the number of individual organisms at each level. Then after that you have pyramid of biomass, which shows the total dry weight and other suitable measure of the total amount of living matter in the given trophic level. And then you have pyramid of energy, which shows the rate of energy flow or productivity at successive trophic levels. So these are the three types of pyramids that depict the number or the biomass or the energy in any given trophic level. So the pyramids of numbers and biomass, they can be upright or inverted. but the pyramid of energy will always be upright. Please remember this fact. This is a very, very important fact for your prelims examination. If at all they ask you which of the following pyramids can be inverted, and then they give you options, so you need to remember that pyramids of numbers and pyramid of biomass can be upright or can be inverted. That is, they can have a shape like this or they can have a shape like this, but the pyramid of energy will always be upright. It will always be like this. So we will discuss why this is happening. Once you understand it conceptually, that why pyramid of number can be inverted or why pyramid of biomass can be inverted, you will not need to remember this fact. So first we'll start with pyramid of number. So first of all, pyramids of number show relationship between producers, herbivores and carnivores as successive trophic levels in terms of their numbers. So the pyramid of numbers show the relationship between these three trophic levels in terms of their absolute number. We are not calculating the energy, we are not calculating the mass, but only the number of individuals at each trophic level. So in grasslands, the producers, which are mainly grasses, are always maximum in number. This number then shows a decrease towards the apex as the primary consumers like rabbits, mice, etc. are lesser in number than grasses. The secondary consumers, snakes, lizards, etc. are lesser in number than the rabbits or the mice. Then finally the top consumers like hawks or other birds are least in number, thus the pyramid becomes upright. So you have a number of producers, then you have primary, then you have secondary consumers like this. So the number keeps on decreasing. So if you look at this particular picture, you will get an understanding of it, that first of all you have the primary producer. From the primary producer, let's say if this is the number of individuals, then the number of primary consumers will be only this much. Then from there the number of secondary consumers will only be this much. The number of tertiary consumers which will be much lower. So this is an absolute number that you can see in a given grassland ecosystem. Similarly, if we talk about a pond ecosystem, so in a pond ecosystem, the pyramid is upright. Here the producers, which are mainly the phytoplanktons, are algae, bacteria, etc. They are maximum in number. Then the herbivores, which are smaller fish, etc. they are lesser in number than the producers. Then the secondary consumers or the carnivores such as small fish, etc. they are lesser in number than the herbivores. And finally the tertiary consumers or the bigger fish, you can say, are the least in number. So that's why it is also very similar to the grassland ecosystem, and that's why this pyramid is also upright. So if you look at this particular picture, you start with a plant or a phytoplankton, then you have smaller fish being consumed by bigger fish and so on, and that's why this is also upright. Then the next one that we have is a forest ecosystem. Now in forest ecosystem, what happens is that the pyramid of number is somewhat different in shape. The producers, which are mainly large sized trees, are lesser in number and they form the base of the pyramid. The herbivores, which are fruit eating birds, or it can be deer, it can be elephant, etc. they are more in number than the producers. Then there is a gradual decrease in the number of successive carnivores again, and that's why this pyramid again after this point is upright. So if we talk about this factor, you see, you start with one tree. This one tree may have these many insects. These insects will be consumed by sparrows, and these sparrows can get consumed by a hawk. So if you see, after this you again have an upright pyramid. But if you talk about the entire shape, this does not have a regular shape at all, because from 1 to you are going to 2000, from 2000 to 90, and from 90 to 1 again, and that's why this is not an upright pyramid. The next one that we have is pyramid of number in terms of parasites. Now in parasites, this food chain is always inverted. This is due to the fact that a single plant may support the growth of many herbivores, and each herbivore in turn is able to provide nutrition to several parasites which support many hyperparasites. So what are parasites and what are hyperparasites? If you look at this particular picture, you have a producer from where you have herbivores like food eating birds. Then from there you have the parasites like lice and bugs, and then you have the hyperparasites like bacteria, fungi or actinomycetes. So if you look at this, this is an inverted pyramid. So that's why you can say that from the producers up to the consumers, there is a reverse position as compared to a grassland or a pond or even in case of a forest. That's so the number of organisms gradually shows an increase, making the pyramid inverted in shape. So that's why you can say that pyramids of numbers do not give a true picture of the food chain, as they are not very functional. They do not indicate the relative effect of the food chain or the size factor of the organism. So all these kind of issues are associated with pyramid of number. So that's why we do not say that this is the ideal case of depicting any food pyramid.